All right, shalom to the elect of Israel. I want to start by giving all the praises, honor, and glory to whom it rightfully belongs, which is Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rachakodash. And what I said was all the praises, honor, and glory belongs to Yahweh, who is the Heavenly Father, whom the world ignorantly calls God, in the name of his Son, Yahweh Shai, who is the Messiah, whom the world ignorantly calls Jesus, in the name of the Holy Spirit, which in Hebrew is Rachakodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, every well. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect. All right, and this is part two to the series, or what I'm going to be doing, called the Three Woes. All right, which is talking about uh, the three world wars. Okay, and in the last part, and by the way, before I continue, let me just say this first. Um, because sometimes I have technical difficulties with this computer. All right, or stuff around me happens. So if I'm talking and in the middle it just like freezes for a long period of time, right? Just skip ahead to where I continue to talk again. Or if I have to go on mute, just skip ahead to where I continue to talk again. All right. Just saying that ahead of time. Okay. So this is part two. All right. I recently did a lesson going into part one of because I was going into this chapter here, because once again, as Apostle now there's a great millstone say, you know, gotta know the history to understand the mystery, right? So, the let me just read this again. First, Revelation chapter 8, verse 13. It says, "And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, 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 to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound." And these three woes are talking about three world wars that are going to happen on the earth. And World War One and Two already happened, and now we're in the time of the last World War getting ready to happen, which is going to usher in the return of Yahweh Shai, right? So in the next chapter, went into you know, right now, we're gonna go verses one through we're gonna Lord willing go through the whole chapter, but just getting some background history to really fully understand what's being talked about here, because once again, as I said in the first part of the of this series is that when you understand like the history and everything, it really cements your faith, and you have to have strong faith. Okay, it really cements it. Now nobody can tell you different. You know, as the head brother Ward down here in the camp in New Jersey said. You know, so this is Revelation chapter 9 verses 1 through 12. Is going into a World War One. Okay, so, and it's obvious, and understanding that, okay, which is where this lesson is coming from, right? Understanding that, all right, is you know understanding the history, right, which is going to help you understand that this first woe is talking about, because what's described here is the first woe. That's why in verse 12 it says, "One woe is past, and behold, there come two woes more hereafter." Right. So once you understand that this is talking about World War One, then you understand that these three woes is talking about three world wars, right? So in the last lesson I left off, right? If you watch that part and then you come to this part, you know, the last part of the lesson left off at was you know, assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and I was going, the time going into the who did it, all right? Where was that? It's, what was going on around the time of that of that era, and basically you had a lot of Serbian nationalism, right? You had Archduke Franz Ferdinand. All right, he was, as it says, right here, because at the time, you had the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? And then you had, you know, the nation of Serbia. And those two were at odds with each other. They were rivals with each other, right? And basically, this guy Archduke Franz Ferdinand, okay, he says here, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, all right, Karl Ludwig Joseph Maria of Austria, was the heir presumptive to the throne of Austria-Hungary. So to this Austro-Hungarian Empire, he was the next heir. Okay, and he was assassinated. Okay, by this guy named Gavrilo Princip. All right, this guy here. It says Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb, right? Because it says a Bosnian Serb. Because at the time, let me just type this in: Bosnia and Herzegovina on the map over there in Europe, okay, aka the bottomless pit. All right, in this area here, all right, in that area, right, around Serbia, Croatia, Montenegro is a place, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Okay, so let me just type this in. And by the way, at this time, there was a lot of Serbian nationalism. Nationalism is basically people who are patriotic and they're for their country and they take great pride in their nation, right? So you had a lot of Serbian nationalism, and what that Serbian nationalism created was a whole lot of secret societies, okay, like the Black Hand, all right, another group called Young Bosnia, all right, and the people that was over here was Southern Slavic people, Southern Slavic people. Okay, and in this land they were divided by uh, religions. They were classified by different religions. Okay, and this guy who assassinated the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, his name is Gavrilo Princip, and he was a Bosnian Serb. All right, he was the one. He was the gunman. Okay, this is a man by the name of Gavrilo Princip. I don't know how to correctly say it. All right, but during this time you had it was called the Black Hand, because ultimately back then they had wanted all basically Southern Slavic people to unite into like a Slavic state, and what the Austro-Hungarian Empire did, they added this area of Bosnia and Herzegovina to their empire, so that angered the people, right? So basically tensions let up, okay, and it came, tensions were leading up, right? Now, once again, you had this secret society called the Black Hand, okay, which once again it says was a secret Serbian military society formed in 1911 with the goal of uniting all Serbs. Serbs means Serbians, all right, really which is like Slavic people, into Southern Slavic people. Really says into a single greater Serbia, right? Led by Captain Dragutin Dimitrijevic. I don't know how to say that. All called APIS. The group used political, cultural, military, and team means to achieve its aims, including espionage, sabotage, and political murders. Listen, it gained notoriety for its alleged involvement in the 1914 assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, an act that precipitated the outbreak of World War One. All right, because this, was the spark. Okay, because in the previous lesson, going into how back then, before the war initially broke out, before World War One initially broke out, you had what was called Maine. Okay, you know, M. Dot A. Let me type that in Maine. It says the acronym MAIN, MAIN, refers to the main underlying causes of World War One, which was militarism, which is a belief in aggressive military buildup. So nations were, increasing their military, their artillery, improving it, advancing it, right? Which leads, to the fact that there were, those first dog fighters in World War One, etc. Right? It says alliances, the system of military pacts like the Triple Entente and Triple Alliance. Yeah, before World War One officially broke out, all these different nations, right? These European nations, they were making alliances with each other. So when it broke out, right, all these nations were drawn, by default because of their alliance into World War One. You see, this is all the Lord is doing. All right. The Lord is a master chess player, man. All right. It says imperialism, the competition for colonies and power. And by the way, for the alliances, you had the European powers versus the it says or the what another other team, so to speak, was the alliances. Like France, Britain, Russia, U.S., etc., Serbia, right, etc. It says imperialism, the competition for colonies and power. Because again, before World War I broke out, right, um, you know, these countries they had colonies and territories even outside of Europe that they were fighting over, which initially caused rivalries between different countries. You see, it says and nationalism, which is intense loyalty and fervor for one's own nation. All right, people were patriotic. They were all for their nation around that time, right? And this is and this is part of the reason why this, you had this guy named Gavrilo Princip. Okay, says how did Gavrilo Princip cause World War I? Right, so let me just click on him real quick. All right, this is him. This is his face. Okay, but it says Gavrilo Princip was a Bosnian Serb student who assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir presumptive to the throne of Austria-Hungary, and his wife Sophie Duchess von Hohenberg in Sarajevo, right? Says which is the capital and largest city of Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? It was the capital of this place, Sarajevo, however you say that, right? On the 28th of June in the year 1914. The assassination set off the July Crisis, which was, it says, a series of events that within 1 month led to the outbreak of World War I, which we're going to get to in a minute. It says Princip was born in Western Bosnia to a poor Serb family, age 13, or yada, yada, yada. It says in 1911, he joined Young Bosnia, okay, which was what? A secret local society aiming to free Bosnia from Austrian rule. So once again, the fact that there was all this Serbian nationalism back then, right? It created secret societies, okay? Like, the Black Hand, okay? Which was one group, all right? And that's the name to say it, but it means it says or unification or death, all right? Because they wanted to once again, remember, unite all Serbs into a single greater Serbia. And the Austro-Hungarian Empire ended that dream, right? So, they, okay, so you had them, but then you also had another group called Young Bosnia. Young Bosnia, right? It says Young Bosnia was a revolutionary separatist youth movement in the early 20th century that aimed to liberate Bosnia and Herzegovina from Austro-Hungarian rule and unify other Slavs into a new nation. So they wanted to liberate this place from the rule of that Austro-Hungarian Empire, because and we go into the reasons how the empire got that place in the first place. All right, but going back, shit, sloppy. Let's make sure everything is cool. All right, so um so you have this group Young Bosnia, right, with this aim. And it says in 1911, he joined Young Bosnia. Who? This guy. Okay. Princip. It says a secret local society aiming to free Bosnia from Austrian rule and achieve the unification of the South Slavs. After attending anti-Austrian demonstrations in Sarajevo, right, he was expelled from school. All right, so we're going into his history. Okay. So, but that's basically, what you need to know for that, right? You know, so because all of this stuff leads up. Okay. All of this stuff leads up, man. Let me just see. All right. So, and if you're asking like what could be the relation between Young Bosnia and the Black Hand, all I've got to do is type it in. How did young Bosnia and the Black Hand relate? Right? It says Young Bosnia was the group of young nationalist students in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right, who carried out the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So they were a group of young nationalists, right? Young nationalists called, that's why Young Bosnia, right? Young people in this. That's while the Black Hand was a secret Serbian society that supported Young Bosnia by providing weapons, money, and basic training for the assassination plot. So these are two different groups. They're not the same thing. The Black Hand, right, which was one society, secret society, had trained, equipped, and provided weapons, you know, and gave money, right, to members of Young Bosnia, all right, for this assassination plan. Okay. It says the Black Hand, led by this guy known as Apis, was an influential secret organization tied to the Serbian military that aimed to unite all Serbs under one state using assassination as a tool to achieve this goal. All right. So they basically, gave them the equipment, money, and training to carry out this assassination plot. Now check this out. Why, or how did the Black Hand stand for assassination? Right. So here it says the assassination attempt and tragic success. You might be thinking like, okay, they plotted on it, but how? The initial plan involved multiple chances to kill the Archduke, but its ultimate success was owed to a series of chaotic and lucky coincidences. Let me rather type this in. How did Black Hand, how did the Black Hand Archduke Franz, see what comes up, right? So you might be wondering, like, how did it happen? So it says the Black Hand learned of Archduke Franz Ferdinand's visit to Sarajevo because it was a publicly announced official visit to inspect military exercises. So this was a publicly announced plan by this guy Archduke Franz Ferdinand, right? This was a publicly announced plan that he was coming there. It says why it says to inspect military exercises, right? And there was some other things too. But he was coming there with his wife as well. It says in the route of the motorcade had been made public well in advance. So the route that, let me type this word motorcade. I don't think I've ever seen that word before. Let me just see. There's a procession of motor vehicles, typically carrying and escorting a prominent person. Prominent meaning an important person, right? So they you know, so his the fact that he was coming and the fact that there was going to be a whole bunch of vehicles in their route that was going to be there while he was coming there was made public, so of course they would know about that. It says the group, composed of Serbian nationalists from the Black Hand and members of Young Bosnia, used this information to plan their assassination attempt on June 28th, 1914. So here's how it unfolded: publicly announced visit, all right, advanced publicity, exploiting the information. Black Hand leaders and their collaborators within the Young Bosnia group learned about the Archduke's travel plans from this public information, right? So it says planning the assassination. They used this knowledge to position their members, including Gavrilo Princip and Nedjelko Kabrinovic, along the announced route to carry out the assassination. So they had people playing there. It's like some Assassin's Creed type of stuff, but just with guns and stuff, right? So, reading this assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Archduke of I'm gonna refer to him as that of Austria, and his wife Duchess Sophie Chodek arrived in Sarajevo by train shortly before 10 a.m. on the 28th of June in the year 1914. Their car was the third in a six-car motorcade heading towards Sarajevo Town Hall. All right. Princip and five other conspirators were positioned along the route. spaced out along the Apple Quay, each instructed to assassinate the Archduke when the royal car reached their position. The first, Mehmed VI, stood near the Austro-Hungarian bank, but lost his nerve and allowed the car to pass without acting. At 10:15 a.m., as the motor, so he failed, right? As the motorcade passed the central police station, 19-year-old student Nedeljko Kabrinovich hurled a grenade at the Archduke's car. The driver accelerated upon seeing the grenade, which had a 10-second delay, and the bomb exploded under the fourth car, seriously wounding two occupants. So he failed. Following this failed attempt, the motorcade sped away, and the remaining conspirators, including Princip, were unable to act due to the speed of the vehicles. After delivering his scheduled speech at the town hall, the Archduke decided to visit the victims of Kabrinovich's grenade attack at the Sarajevo hospital. To avoid the city center, General Oscar Podierek directed the royal car to travel straight along the Apple Quay to the hospital. However, Podierek failed to inform the driver, Leopold Czech, about this change. On the way to the hospital, all right, so let me just continue. All right. Actually, no, it's right here. It says on the way to the hospital, Lodgka, following the original plan, turned onto a side street where Princip, this guy, the gunman, right? So he turned onto a side street. It says what? Um, it says on the way to the hospital, Loshka, following the original plan, turned onto a side street where Princip happened to be standing in front of a delicatessen. So he was standing in front of a deli, right? Deli is short for delicatessen. It says after Podierek shouted at him to stop, Loshka halted the car and began reversing. As he did so, the engine stalled and the gears locked. This was all set up by the Lord, man. All right, because from this was the spark that led to World War One, which was prophesied to come. Right, this is all the Lord. The engine stalled because then the gears locked. Princip stepped forward, drew an F9 model 1910 semi-automatic pistol. All right, something like this. All right, well this. Right, it says and fired twice at close range into the car. The first bullet struck the Archduke in the neck, while the second hit the Duchess in the abdomen. Both died shortly afterward. So there you go. So they go into the arrest and trial and everything, imprisonment and death. Okay, but let me go back to the top. So there you get the story of his how it happened. So so the Archduke got assassinated, right? Let me see what was Archduke Franz Ferdinand assassination car. It's an old school car. It says Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in the 1910 Graf and Stiff double Phaeton touring car. The car owned by Court Franz von something stopped by chance in front of. All right, so we just give what we just read. But this is this type of car he had. Okay, let me just up real quick so I can get images of this. All right, but I think it said without a hood, basically somewhere else. All right, they didn't have the hood up, which makes sense, because it struck him right in the neck and all that. You see, so this is the type of car that they were in when it happened, right? And this is a drawing of the assassination. Okay, so there you go. Now, why was he assassinated? Right, and basically, to sum it up, he just had he just had reforms. He had plan of reforms, and everything that will go against the Serbia and all of that, right? You see, and we had a bunch of reforms and all of that. Okay, but ultimately they assassinated them, though, right? So it says the assassination sparked the July crisis. Now, what is the July crisis? What was the July crisis? And basically, it is in short terms, what the July crisis was. It was a month of events in the month of July back then of the year 1914. You know, basically things happened. These like the final steps before World War One happened, right? So it says the July crisis was a month-long diplomatic and military escalation, Slovakia, in July 1914 that led to the outbreak of World War One. It began with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which prompted Austria-Hungary to issue a harsh ultimatum to Serbia with Germany's backing. Now, Germany, we're going to get into that in a minute. To issue a harsh ultimatum to Serbia with Germany's backing, triggering a cascade of alliances, mobilization, declarations of war across Europe. All right. So this is why, so now we're getting up to where this war is about to be declared, to where World War One is about to be declared, man. Okay. So this so the assassination led to this. All right. Because of that happening, this is what came of it. Right. So let's get to it. July crisis steps timeline. Right. So it goes here. These are the events happening. So June 28th, 1914, the Archduke is assassinated. Okay. July 5th, 1914, Austria, Hungary, and Germany discussed their plans for a potential war with Serbia. July 23rd, Austria, Hungary issues a rigid ultimatum to Serbia with demands intentionally designed to be rejected. So basically, the empire of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they gave Serbia, because that's who was a part of you know, that's who that the assassin Gavrilo Princip, he had to do with that. He was all for the idea they was coming with and everything. All right. So because of that, all of that background and the animosity the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Serbia have with each other, right? They gave ultimatum. Austria-Hungary gave an ultimatum after their Archduke was assassinated, right? With certain demands. Now, July 25th, Serbia accepts most of Austria-Hungary's demands, but not the condition allowing Austrian police to investigate in Serbia. It says Austria-Hungary breaks off diplomatic relations with Serbia. So basically, they accepted most of it, but not all of it. All right. And the empire, Austria-Hungary, was like, that's not good enough. Right. July 26th, Britain offers to mediate the conflict, but Germany and Austria-Hungary reject the proposal. Britain tried to get it, mediated. Like Germany and Austria was like, nah. And then the thing is, at the time this was going on, once again, you had this guy, it was mentioned in the scriptures. Slovakia. Name, German Emperor. Yep, Kaiser Wilhelm II. You know, let me see, what was Kaiser Wilhelm's role in World War One? During the war, although nominally Supreme Commander William did not attempt to resist the generals when they kept his conduct in their own hands, he encouraged instead of challenging the grandiose war aims. All right, so this guy, Kaiser Wilhelm II, the former German emperor. All right, he was the emperor of Germany. All right, now before the war, during this July crisis, Germany offered Austria-Hungary a blank check. And what was the blank check? Because Germany offered Austria-Hungary the blank check, so on July 5th of 1914, all right, which is it says was a promise of unconditional support shortly after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So basically, Germany told the Austro-Hungarian Empire, like, look, you know, we got your back no matter what. That's basically what happened. This assurance provided Austria-Hungary with the confidence to pursue a more aggressive stance against Serbia, a decision that ultimately escalated the crisis and triggered the chain of events leading to World War One. So back to the timeline, right? And let me see something. Let me just type this in, right? So they issued the blank check, but who was the emperor when um Germany issued the blank check? The Emperor of Germany, when the blank check was issued on July 5th, 1914, was Kaiser Wilhelm II. So he was the emperor during World War One of Germany. He was Kaiser Wilhelm II. All right. Let me just see who was the emperor of Germany throughout World War One. It says the emperor of Germany throughout World War One was Kaiser Wilhelm II, who reigned from 1888 until his abdication and exile in November 1918 during the German Revolution, which ended his rule and led to the establishment of Weimar Republic. So boom, right? So we get that. So now back to this, right? And you see it keeps saying the month of July. That's why it's called the July crisis, because all of these things were going on here. Okay? So July 25th, it's like July 25th, yeah, Austria-Hungary breaks off diplomatic relations with Serbia. Britain offers to mediate the conflict, but Germany and Austria-Hungary reject the proposal. July 28th of the same year, 1914, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. And Austria-Hungary had allies, and Serbia had allies. And on this date, July 28th, 1914, when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, that is when World War One began. Okay, look. When exactly did World War One begin? Right? It says World War One began on July 28, 1914, when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, escalating the assassination. So see, that's when it started. Escalating the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand a month prior into a full-blown European conflict. This declaration triggered a complex network of alliances. See, that's part of that main acronym: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. See, before this date came along, these different European countries are making alliances with each other. So when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, right? Austria-Hungary's alliances were drawn into it, and Serbia's alliances were drawn into it. Simple. World War One. All right. And after that, you know, they declare war. One thing I want to get into, right, is really let me read this part. July 31st, Germany demands Russia halt its mobilization. Germany declares war on Russia. See, so Germany declared war on Russia. Germany invades Belgium, which we're about to get into, leading Britain to declare war. Britain declares war on Germany. Austria-Hungary declares war on Russia. All right, so the first fighting after that was the first fighting after that was you know was between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, but there was also known as, let me type this in. What was Germany's first move in World War One? Right. It says Germany's first move in World War One was to declare war on Russia on August 1st, 1914, followed by a declaration of war on France on August 3rd, and a subsequent invasion of neutral Belgium that it says that same day to implement the Schlieffen Plan, or the Schlieffen Plan, right? And basically, all this was, right, this came from a guy, Well, it says it right here, right? Schleifen plan. It came from this guy, Alfred von Schleifen, but I believe he passed, and he was like a head of the German army. Okay, he was one of them generals up there, right? And while they, you know, and I believe he passed. Slack if I'm wrong, but it was given to somebody else. Another general to activate it. Right. But in short, because I ain't gonna draw, the lesson out too much longer now. All right. But in short, it says the Schleifen plan was Germany's pre-World War One strategy to rapidly defeat France by invading through neutral Belgium before. So they wanted to, basically to defeat France, right? And instead of going through France's, normal borders, they went through, other countries to get to France. All right. It says by what invading through neutral Belgium before Russia could fully mobilize, right? And then turning its attention to Russia, right? They wanted to get there before Russia could mobilize, and after that, they wanted to go after Russia. However, the plan failed due to factors like the invasion of neutral Belgium, provoking Great Britain declared war, because in the mid, on the way there and everything, they met, some of the British Army, because you can read about it. Let me see steps of the. If you're really interested, I might read about it. You know, So here, um, it says, but what was the purpose though? Before I get it, it says, we read that. It says, however, the plan failed due to factors like the invasion of neutral Belgium provoking Great Britain to declare war, Germany's insufficient resources, such as inadequate railroad capacity and troop numbers for the ambitious operation, and the speed of the Russian mobilization. Right now, it says British intervention and invasion of Belgium, a neutral country that directly led Great Britain to enter war. So they wanted to basically go through other countries like Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands in order to get to France. Right? To get a quick victory on France. Okay. And let me just see if I can pull up. Okay, so this is the image, right? All this is adding up. All right. It's like building blocks. That's why we're going through this. All right, so you can understand. Okay. But you see, this is France, this is Germany. So they wanted to go Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. They want to take this route rather than this coming here. They would have to take this route to quickly, get into France and defeat their forces, before Russia could mobilize, right? So basically, all right, going back, it says key aspects of the Schleifen plan. The plan was devised to, and by the way, this area is called the Western Front. All right, you know that's the Western Front. What was the Western Front? Let me type this in on Google. What was the main battlefield of World War One? Right, says the Western Front was the main battlefield of World War One, where the most powerful military forces in Europe, the German and French armies, met, running through Belgium. And you should understand why the German and French armies met. The Schleifen plan. Running through Belgium and France from the coast to the Swiss border, this front was defined by the trench warfare that developed after the First Battle of Marne halted the initial German advance. Because basically, what they did was, I'm going to sum it up in a little bit, right? German forces, right, try to get to France, right? So they came through Belgium, right? But Belgium fought back. Britain and everything was involved, you know, and basically those forces, they kept on retreating and retreating and retreating until the point where they got to what's called the Battle of Marne, right? What was Battle of Marne, right? It says the first Battle of the Marne, or I guess is how you say it, which was from September 5th to 12th, 1914, was a decisive World War One battle, right, where French and British forces halted the German army's rapid advance on Paris. They were trying to get to Paris. Remember, they kept the German Empire, they kept advancing and advancing and advancing to try to get into France, right? But when it got to this point, the first Battle of Marne, it says French and British forces halted the German army's rapid advance. So they stopped the Germans from advancing, but by fighting back and all of that, ultimately leading to the end of the Schlieffen plan. That's why that plan didn't work. It says for a quick victory and initiating the lengthy trench warfare of the Western Front. Right? Because after that, let me just type in. Actually, let me see if I've got it here still. Slovakia. I'm about to get into it because it's just background info you got to know, man. So boom. Actually, let me type this in. What battles came after the first Battle of Marne? All right. So it says following the first Battle of Marne in September 1914, you got the Battle of Ypres. I know how to say that, right? Gallipoli campaign. All right, that was the next year and all of that. All right. But basically, okay. Let me type this in actually. Hold on. What immediate trench warfare bear in 1 second. Okay. Right. So I typed in on Google what battle led to the immediate trench warfare in the Western Front, World War One. All right, because so now it gives you the list. Okay, this is what I was looking for. I said the battle that immediately preceded the establishment of extensive trench warfare on the Western Front was the first battle of the Aisne or Ain, however you say that, in September 1914. Following this battle, both sides began digging into the ground, leading to a 4-year stalemate. The Ain followed directly after the decisive first battle of the Marne, right? So you had the Battle of the Marne, right? Then you had the first Battle of Ain, right? It says as the Germans retreated, because the Germans had retreated, okay, after this Battle of Marne, right? It says they established strong defensive positions on the high ground north of the Ain River. Look that up. I'm gonna keep this image here real quick. Ain River. Map. Right? So that area of the Western Front. Let's see. That's the Ain River right there. All right. Let me see here. All right, this is the Ain River. If you could see that, this is the Ain River right here. Okay, it's the Ain River. All right. So it said as the Germans retreated, they established strong defensive positions on the high ground north of the Ain River. When the Allied forces attacked, and the Allied forces talking about those forces because you had once again two coalitions. All right, what were two coalitions of World War One? Right. So it says the two main coalitions in World War One were the Allied powers. So when you hear Allied, it's talking about a specific group of nations allied with each other, right? Which are also called the Entente, which is primarily comprised of France, Britain, and Russia. later joined by Italy, the United States, and others, right? And the Central Powers. I went through this in the last part. And the Central Powers consisted mainly of the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. All right. So here you go. Okay. The Allied powers: France, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, the U.S., and Japan. Okay. So it says when the Allied forces attacked, those forces we just read about, they were met with fierce resistance from German machine guns and artillery. Unable to make a breakthrough, both sides began to dig in to protect themselves from the intense firepower. All right. So then it says in the race to the sea, in the weeks that followed, the Allied and that so they began to dig what? Both sides began to dig in to protect themselves from the intense firepower. That's where that trench warfare comes, man. You know, so they were. That's why you got pictures like this, okay, from World War One. They dug trenches. All right. And by the way, I know you see this picture here, right? If you already know the breakdown of Revelation 9, you will recognize these helmets. Okay. This the style of these helmets. These are German troops. You know, right? So, um, in the weeks that followed, the Allied and German armies attempted to outflank each other by advancing northward. The series of maneuvers and battles ended when the trenches were extended all the way to the North Sea coast of Belgium. As each side attempted to gain an advantage, they were simply met by another fortified trench line. On November 14th, the continuous line of trenches extended from the North Sea coast to the Swiss border. With no open flank to attack, the Western Front devolved into a prolonged war of attrition, with armies facing each other from fortified underground positions for the next 4 years. All right, so boom. All right, so we got that. That was the point I wanted to get to. Where they went out to the field and they started fighting. Right now we know Germany. It led up to that. Okay. Now, so they were fighting. So now let's go back to Revelation 9. And once again, the Lord is the one that had caused all of this. Book of Isaiah 45, verse 1. Right? Verse 7, I mean. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, Yahweh, do all these things. The Most High is the one that controls, right? He creates and controls, the good and the bad. He brings the good times and the bad times along. Okay? So one thing, let's go back to Revelation 9, actually. All right? Revelation 9. Okay? And verse 3. It says, and there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power, right? Now let's deal with this. Locusts, right? Sakris, right? Locusts. All right, so we're going into the actual locust. But when you look at a locust, right? You look at a locust flying. I want you to, really keep in mind this shape here, of locusts flying. It's locust is a type of insect. You see their shape flying, right? Now, during World War One, remember the militarism. You had what? Dog fighters. Okay. At first, it was reconnaissance planes. If I'm saying that right, right? Let me tell you something. When were dog fighters used? First used in World War One, right? So it says dog fighters emerged in World War One in the autumn or fall of 1914, beginning with the improvised tactics like firing handguns and grenades from reconnaissance aircraft. All right. So at the beginning, right, it says the first aerial kill by machine gun occurred in October 1914. Right. It says, but the era of dedicated fighter aircraft and the synchronized machine gun firing. Actually, before I continue reading that, right? Let's understand what reconnaissance is. Okay, reconnaissance definition, right? It says military observation of a region to locate an enemy or ascertain strategic fighters, right? Features, Salakia. So reconnaissance is basically, when you looking when you get in when you basically when you locate in an enemy's position. That's what reconnaissance is. So when they were using those dogfighter planes at first in World War I, right? Basically they were using them for what? To fly over the land, you know, communicate where the enemy's position is located at to their army, to their military, right? Type this in. What were the first? What were the reconnaissance? What were the reconnaissance planes in World War I used for? It says in World War One, right? Reconnaissance planes were primarily used for observing enemy positions and adjusting artillery fire, employing aerial photography and written reports to provide intelligence on troop and supply movements. See, so that's what they were, for, basically telling their army where the enemy was located at from the air. So you think about it, they on the battlefield, you got planes flying up in the air. This airborne intelligence was crucial for strategic planning and helped prevent catastrophic situations, such as the trapping of the British Expeditionary Force in 1914. All right, and it talks about how they, you know, um, the pilots were, using throwing bricks, firing handguns at first from these planes, because these planes here they weren't designed to fight, you know, from the plane itself. How did Khan since in World War One? Uh, and these are not the exact planes it's talking about in Revelation 9. I'm gonna get to that in a minute. You know, these are like an early stage of those planes, but that's not the exact thing. Okay. Um, okay, here it says fight to protect reconnaissance. Initially, pilots had only small sidearms for defense, but as war progressed, they were equipped with machine guns, fighter escorts to protect vulnerable reconnaissance and artillery observation planes. Escort fighters were developed to engage and destroy enemy planes. See, so boom, where you had it. All right, but they were small sidearms throwing bricks. I read another place. These are some images of those reconnaissance planes, man. All right, you know. Now, let me just type in. This was one of them. The Samson 2. I believe this might have been a British plane, right? The way it looked like. Okay. Um, on names of the world. I just want to get some names, because it's good when you have names, so you can actually refer to these things. It says World War One reconnaissance planes included British types like the B.E.2 and Avro 504, the Royal Aircraft Factory RE8, and the de Havilland DH-4, French aircraft such as the Samson 2 and Bruegel 14, and German aircraft like the LFG Roland C2 and the high altitude Rumpler G7. All right. So there you have it, man. But as I said, right, it says so. They were being used in the fall. The beginning of it was being used. It says, but the era of dedicated fighter aircraft, meaning planes that were dedicated to fighting, right? And the synchronized machine gun firing through the propeller was largely established in 1915, marking the true beginning of widespread aerial combat, right? All right, so let me just get something. Dog fighters. So the early stages says the birth of air combat, late 19th, the first machine gun attack. The first use of a machine gun to shoot down an enemy aircraft. Let me type something in. All right, so they began to be, so dog fighting really started, you know, during World War One, from meaning, they started, using these planes to fight each other from, like late 1914 to early 1915. That's when dogfighting really began, and during World War One. From late 1914 to the beginning of 1915. Okay, that's when they started using those dogfighters uh in that war, right? So let me just type this in. When were tailgun dogfighters first used in World War One? Right? Man. All right. Now here they say it wasn't, but there obviously were. I just gotta find it, man. They're trying to say this. When were machine guns placed in the back dog fighting planes? World War One. Right? See, the other one said they weren't, but now said they did. You see, the scriptures is right, man. So during World War One, machine guns were placed on the back of planes in the early phases of aerial combat, primarily in two-seater reconnaissance and observation aircraft. This design became less common for single fighters after the development of synchronized forward-fighting machine guns in mid-1915. All right, you got early war, right? Dedicated rear gunners. While fighters developed sophisticated forward-firing armaments, two-seater aircraft continued to rely on a flexible rear-mounted gun for defense against attacks from behind. All right, says the British scarf ring mount, developed during the war, allowed a rear gunner to swivel and elevate a Lewis machine gun, giving them an excellent field of fire. Let me type this in. I want to keep that here. So, you just imagine them in the trenches and stuff around here, making trench warfare, and planes flying over, looking down like it has right here from a bird's eye view, telling their military where the enemy is located at. And meanwhile, fighting enemy planes in the air and all of that stuff, man. It's a world war. You know, two-seater gun aircraft memes from World War One. Right, so you got, because a key type of World War One aircraft was the armed two-seater, right, in which an observer or gunner sat in the back to operate a flexible machine gun for defense. The term tail gunner is more accurately applied to later aircraft with the gun mounted in the extreme rear. But in World War One, the rear seat gunner served the same defensive purpose. So you had basically a man flying, the pilot, flying the plane, and then you also had a guy in the back of the plane shooting. Allied aircraft, Bristol F-2 fighter. It's called the Bristol. Look these things up. You know, um, Bristol F.2 fighter. Right, it's one of them right here. So it says what? It says the Bristol F.2 fighter is a British First World War two-seat biplane fighter and reconnaissance aircraft. Okay, so was one where they shoot out the back. You see? Boom! Look at that. Look at that. All right, look at that, man. You got the man right here, and this is a space for another man in the back. You see, with the machine gun. All right, you know what's another one? Um, Arco DH.4, right? Arco DH.4, Arco DH.4, two-seater World War I plane. Another one. It says Arco DH.4 is a British two-seat biplane day bomber of the First World War. Right? It says it was a bomber plane. Okay. Let me see another one. Um, Royal Aircraft Factory. Let me type that in. Royal Air. So people talking about the Bible is fake, but like the apostle said, people talk about the Bible is fake, but it got all its history in it. You know? Oh, is this the right one? Yeah. There we go. Between 1911 and 1914, the Royal Aircraft Factory used the FE-2 Farman Experimental 2 designation for three quite different aircraft that shared only a common farmer pusher biplane layout. All right. You know? Let me see. That's just the layout of it. I'm gonna actually get a picture with it constructed. Is that it? I know they're not showing pictures. We looked at the Samson too, but I'll get it again. You see how all the stuff led up to it. You have to know that background history to actually pinpoint certain things. Okay, Samson 2, World War I, right? It says Samson 2 A.2 was a French biplane reconnaissance aircraft. Okay, look this one up. Yeah, see, it's that one up there. You know, pilot here, this guy back here. All right. So I mean, you get the idea, and then you got the other side. Uh, I want to look this one up. Sikorsky, yeah, Moramitz. Look that one up. Right, this one was used. Okay. Um, another side they had their planes too. The other side they had their planes. Okay. But when the scriptures talk, so I mean, look. So let me get that one back. Let me just use this one, the Bristol F.2 fighter. Right. So the planes we just looked at, that came from the Allied side, right? And other planes we didn't look at as the Central Powers. So they had their planes, their dogfighter planes with tail gunners, and they had their dogfighter planes with tail gunners, right? But let me get that other one, Bristol F2 fighter again, right? So let's look at this. So you see the shape of this plane, right? Now let's look at this. You see the locust. You see this is and when John the Revelator, right, which was John the Apostle, when he was getting these visions, and revelation, he didn't he didn't they didn't know the term fighter jet back then, or dog fighter. They didn't know that. So he was describing it as best as he can. They look just alike. Look at this. A locust and these dog fighter planes look just alike, man. You see what he's describing. So when we read Revelation 9, right? It says Revelation chapter 9, verse 3, and there came out of the smoke locusts upon earth. So it's talking about during World War One, right? There were what? These fighter jets, these dog fighters, you know? And specifically he's talking about these ones with the tail gunners, because why? Let's keep reading. It says, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. Now let's look at something. How do scorpions attack? A scorpion attacks by arching its tail over its body and using its stinger to inject venom into a victim. All right, but here's the thing: the stinger is at the back of the scorpion. That's where the damage comes out. So when you look at these dogfighter planes, that's why I said specifically this one, because specifically these ones, not just this one, but specifically these types, right? You know, they were used in World War One because what? These planes they had the tail gun, all right, the tail gunner. So when it talks about and they were given power as the scorpions of the earth have power, it's, it's just like a scorpion uses, you know, that stinger at the back of it to attack. These dogfighter planes in World War One, you know, hey, it's they were using the tail gun, which was at the back of the plane. See, so this is all describing World War One here. You see. It says, and it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree. All right, because what? They were shooting at men. Okay, let me see. Let me type this in. Who were the targets of the dog fighter planes in World War One? Says during World War One, the primary targets of dogfighter planes were enemy aircraft. The practice of dogfighting developed out of the need to eliminate aerial threats, which first emerged as unarmed reconnaissance planes. All right. But also, look, it says ground forces and positions. While dogfighting mainly refers to air-to-air combat, some World War One fighters were also used for ground attack missions, strafing enemy troops, trenches, and supply dumps. In the later years of the war, German ground attack planes were used with devastating effects, and the Allies also developed specialized ground attack aircraft. Okay, so let me just type it in bluntly. Did the dogfighter planes in World War One shoot at enemy ground forces? Says yes, World War One fighter planes did shoot at enemy ground forces, a practice known as strafing. While air-to-air combat, dogfighting was a primary role, attacking troops in trenches and other ground targets became more common as the war progressed. Boom. So I mean, so when the scripture is accurate, right? And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, or either any green thing, neither any tree. So they were, because they were shooting at men. It says, but only those men which have not. I'm gonna read it again. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, because they were shooting at men. It says, but only those men which have not the seal of the Most High in their foreheads. You know, because back in that time, you know, you had basically what it's saying is, back in that time, there was men that, down in their, seed line, okay, that will come out, that would come from them. The elect would come from them. So the Lord didn't allow those men to be killed. You see? The Lord didn't allow those men to be killed back in that time. All right? For example, if you're of the elect and you're, father, you're, however many generations back, your grandfather, say he was over there or whatever, the Lord didn't allow him to get killed. All right? So you could be here. All right? That's how that worked. You know? Verse 5, it says, and to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. Because here's the thing, right? How long did World War I last? It says World War I lasted for 4 years, 3 months, and 14 days from its beginning on July 28th, 1914. Right? And it says to the armistice on November 11th, 1918. So they say 4 years, but let me type this in, how long the one World War I officially end. Right? It says World War I ended with the signing of an armistice between Germany and the Allied powers on November 11th, 1918, which ceased hostilities on the Western Front at 11 a.m. This agreement was later formalized by the Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28th, 1919, which set the terms for the post-war order, including reparations and territorial changes for Germany. So from 1914 to the formalizing of this armistice, right, between Germany and the Allied powers in on June 28th, 1919, right? So that's, I mean, hey, you can actually, kind of say that because July, what was it, 28th of 1914, that World War I began, right? And then June 28th of 1919, only a month behind, right? Um, it ended. So when it says 5 months, it's talking about 5 years. Scripture's talking code, man. That's how long World War I lasted. 5 years. It ain't really 5 months. It says, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. See? Here we go. Because what? They shot those bullets out of the back of the plane. That's how they wounded people. It says, verse 6. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and the death shall flee from them. Because look, right? Let me just start off by typing this. Were there a lot of injured casualties in World War I? Right? It says yes, there were a massive number of injured casualties in World War I, with estimates placing the number of wounded military personnel at around 23 million. All right, jumping down, it says the primary causes of these injuries were artillery and small arms fire, while poison gas, trench warfare, and even the 1918 influenza pandemic also contributed to the overwhelming medical toll. All right, so people were injured, but it said what? And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them, because there was what? What type of sin? All right. So I typed it on Google. Were there men during World War I that were injured and wanted to die but couldn't? Okay. Now it says yes. Many men during World War I were severely injured and left to die but could not. Historical accounts describe soldiers who suffered. Historical accounts of these things. See, it's real. Describe soldiers who suffered extreme trauma and were not expected to survive, but because of improvements in battlefield medicine, were treated and lived with life-altering wounds and disabilities. Okay, euthanasia on the battlefield, right? It says here there were many accounts of men begging their pals to be shoot them on the battlefield. This is written by somebody, right? It says to be shoot them on the battlefield. One that has always stuck in my head is the wounded soldier who was found in a shell hole filled with mud with just his head protruding. Going off memory, he had been there about a week in no man's land since the last attack and was pleading for someone to shoot him. This particular account appears in a book. They called it Pass in Dale, and the man in question said he just couldn't bring himself to do it. There was no way to get him out of it, and he was left to die. All right. Give me just 1 second. I'm gonna just type something on Chat GPT again. All right. Bear me just 1 second. Um, you just skip ahead to where I continue talking. Bear me 1 second. Let me just look. This is one I got up so far. Huh. All right. So one of the accounts I got is by a man named Adrian Carton Dewire. Right. This guy here. All right. Um. It says Adrian Carton Dewire was a one-eyed, one-armed Belgian British Army officer known as the Unkillable Soldier for his extraordinary bravery and resilience through multiple wars, including the Boer War, World War One, and World War Two. He sustained numerous injuries, including being shot multiple times in the face, losing his left eye and hand. As you see, his left eye, left hand, right? And surviving two plane crashes and a tunnel escape from a POW camp. All right. I'm not really looking for that. Okay. Bear with me 1 second. Because it's certain, like, I didn't really like look this up yet. Well, I did, Slocky. It's just I had the notes and then on my phone because there was certain stories of actual, men that was begging to, die and everything because of their injuries during World War I. But they, you know, doctors refused and everything to give them the painkilling medicine, and so they had to, suffer that pain they were facing. Mm, all right, let me get this one. Port, um, Lancet. All right, so it says drawing on reports and historical overviews published in the Lancet. Let me just see this real quick. All right. Okay. Didn't load. I guess you could check it out. It says the magazine's archives reflect the immense challenges faced by World War I surgeons and the radical innovations made under pressure. Reports highlight the gruesome nature of injuries, the persistent threat of infection, and the transformation of surgical specialties. Right. So these are reports that come from this. All right, just Lance. It's called the Lancet. All right, a magazine archive. Right. Says reports from and about the Lancet during World War I detailed the extreme circumstances that drove medical evolution, including the following: wound infection. Surgeons were forced to address catastrophic wound infections caused by contaminated environments. The development of new antiseptics to clean wounds was a major advance. Guillotine amputations. To work quickly, many surgeons at the front performed amputations. Amputation meaning it says using the guillotine method. They cut stuff off, which left nerves exposed. Let me type this in. What was the guillotine method of surgery World War I? All right, let me get this here real quick. All right, off of imperial.ac.uk says World War I surgeons could do little for amputees' pain. All right, let me see if I get to it. Because during the Battle of Somme, how we say that, which is actually a war during that time, in 1916, in those 5 years, Marmaduke Shield, a senior consulting surgeon who treated many military casualties after they returned to England, wrote that post-amputation pain was a source of intolerable suffering to his amputee patients and of despair to those who fit them with artificial limbs. He later called for surgeons not to use the guillotine method, reporting in the Lancet that it left nerves exposed, causing both stump pain and poor prosthetic fit. Boom. You know? So yeah, it says, um, yeah, so I mean that caused them pain, you know, that caused them pain. Let me go back out of this source right here, right? But it says now listen to this. This is the guillotine method. Oh man. I'm just now finding about this method. It says the procedure, right? That says the procedure was typically a temporary life-saving measure performed on soldiers with severely affected limbs. It says the guillotine moniker is a misnomer. The process was not a quick single chop. Instead, it involved a series of circular cuts through the tissue. Skin cut. The surgeon made a circumferential cut through the skin, which was then allowed to retract naturally. Muscle cut. Subsequent cuts were made through the deeper tissues and muscles at the level of the skin. So they cutting and cutting and cutting. Bone cut. Finally, the bone was sawed through, leaving the end of the stump exposed. All right. Now says consequences. While the guillotine method saved lives, it was a brutal procedure with significant drawbacks for the soldier. The open wound would lead to complications that resulted in poor outcomes for prosthetic limbs. Stump pain. The surgery could leave nerves exposed, resulting in severe pain in the residual limb. Without, let me just actually just type this in. Um, were any painkillers used in World War One? Yeah, they say yeah, but still, there's others I ain't, really looked into before, doing this lesson. Okay, because I just wanted to, do it. Okay, but all right, there's more. Some, I guess you can look into. All right, I can read probably one more. Um, all right, yeah, I'll have to look into more, but I mean, basically, all right, 'cause I mean, the scripture says it. All right, Revelation 9 and 6, and in those days, right, back then, men shall men see. So these men, they got messed up. They had wanted to die and everything because of that pain they were suffering from all the injuries they caught. Think about it. It said millions of men, right, suffering the pain and all of that from back then, from the injuries they got. And then you trying to saw their stuff off. Look, so I mean, obviously they're gonna want to, die and all of that. Okay, obviously. And I wish I could show images, but YouTube and all that, right? So now we understand this. All right, that was an example. Let me just type in let me type this somewhere. Soldiers and extreme agonizing pain during surgery in World War One. Man. It says yes, many soldiers experienced extreme pain during surgery in World War One. Although anesthesia was available and represented an improvement over earlier conflicts, while medical professionals had access to modern anesthetic agents, factors like chaotic battlefield conditions, medical treatments, and primitive administration methods meant that many soldiers were undertreated and in agony. They was in pain, man. They was in pain. You know, they was in pain, man. You imagine that? Your limb is getting sawed off, your bone and everything cut through your man. They going at it too, trying to get it done quick. But I mean, you can read more on that, right? So now we get it. Moving on. Revelation 9 and 7. And the shapes of the locusts were like on the horses prepared for battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns of gold. Now this refers to what's called pickle hog. Let me just type in what was the pickle hog helmet. It says the pickle hog was a German military and police helmet characterized by its iconic metal spike. This, right? And this, what you're gonna, see that it's a spike, but You can also add. There's also what's called plume, if I'm saying it right, which is like string, like hair, like or string, like things you can attach to the helmet to that point, all right, or that spike on the helmet and take off. It says characterized by its iconic metal spike that was widely adopted in the 19th century and became a prominent symbol of the Prussian army. You see, it's gold, right? What does the scripture say? And on their heads were as it were crowns like gold. See, right? It says designed primarily to protect the wearer's hair from sword blows and projectiles. Says the helmet also served to identify rank and regiment and create a more intimidating appearance. While the spike's functional purpose was to deflect blows, it became a liability in World War One. So they were still using it during World War One. It became a liability in World War One. You see, and was eventually replaced by the modern steel Stahlhelm for frontline troops by 1916. And that's these helmets here. Okay, but before they had that, was the Pickelhaube helmets. Okay, and even Kaiser Wilhelm, just to show you that people actually wore that. Let me get this one. All right, Otto and Bismarck. He was a chancellor, but as a Wilhelm, he basically got rid of this dude. Okay, meaning he took him out of his office, out of his position. But see, you know, this is a German Otto von Bismarck. And you see the helmet he's wearing. See, Pickelhaube plum helmet or Pickelhaube helmet because the plum is different. Okay. Um, Let me look up this one. Kaiser Wilhelm second Pickelhaube helmet. Let's see how long this been going for. You know, but him. I mean, he had this. Oh, here we go. Right here. There's a picture of him wearing it. Right here. You see the golden ones. They were more so used among higher ranking officials. All right. Let's see. There's that. Look at this one. It's a literal picture. There go the helmet right there. It's gold. Look at that. See? So there you go. Scriptures is on point. It says, and on their heads were crowns like gold, and their faces were the faces of men, because it was men in the plains, right? Verse 8, and they had hair as the hair of women. Now, this is referring to, once let me look this up real quick. Again, pickle hog, right? You go on here. Um, see this is a picture of Otto von Bismarck wearing it. You know, trying to find a part where it talks about you could take the thing off and on. Uh, because when it says hair like women, they had helmets like they had these attachable what they call plume. See, Russian Pickelhaube of the 1849 version with detachable plumes. This hair-like thing is called plumes, and look like hair of women. See, it looked like women's hair. Let me see. I just want to read about because I read it before on Wikipedia and everything, trying to find it. Well, I can read this part right now. All right, I think it's down there. All right, but anyway, it says the basic pickle hull was made of hardened boiler leather given a glossy black finish and reinforced with metal trim, usually plated with gold or silver for officers that included a metal spike at the crown. Early versions had a high crown, but the height gradually was reduced and the helmet. All right, so they just going into the you know the design of it. Okay. Oh, man, it's locked in. All right. So let me read this. Let me just type it in rather. All right. What is pickle hog plume? Right. Now it says here a pickle hog plume was a decorative crest or bunch of hair, see, attached to the top of a German pickle hog helmet, primarily for parade or ceremonial use. These plumes were removable and typically made of horsehair for enlisted men and officers. And I mean, hey, look, women today be, wigs, especially the black ass woman, she be wearing horsehair sometime, and wigs and shit, man. All right, but anyways, but it just looks like hair though. It says, or sometimes the more expensive yak or ostrich feathers for generals and high-ranking officers. All right, they were used to indicate rank and unit affiliation on formal occasions and could be replaced with a spike for battlefield wear. Right, removable. The spike of the helmet was designed with a removable top, allowing the spike to be swapped out for the plume and Tritcher parade socket. Okay, I ain't gonna read all that. Okay, but I hurt my eyes a little bit. All right, so that's basically that. Okay, so now Revelation chapter 9. So now we get it. Revelation 9 and 8. And they had hair as the hair of women. See that? And their teeth as the teeth of lions. Because what came from these dog fighters is the bullets. All right. The bullets from the plane. You know. Let me just look something up. World War I dog fighter jet. You see there. Bullet types. You know, tell me about it. It says World War I two-seater planes typically fired uh, 0.303 inch into 7.7 millimeter bullets. Let me just look that up. All right, 7.7 meter bullets. Yeah, you know, there you go. All right, but verse 9 now says, and they had breastplates as were breastplates of iron, going so you know how they were made. They had iron in them and all of that. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running the battle. Okay, and that's the sound of them flying through the air. Verse 10, they had tails like on the scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, talking about the tail gun on the plane, as we just went through. And their power. All right, but 5 years, because that's how long World War I lasted. Verse 11, then they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue after his name Apollyon. Right? And this is talking about Kaiser Wilhelm II. Abaddon comes from the Hebrew word Abad, right? It was place of destruction, ruin, Abaddon. Okay, and we get the Greek Apollyon, right? Meaning what? Destroyer, angel of the bottomless pit. And remember, the bottomless pit is Europe. Okay, it's talking about the Emperor of Germany during World War One, which is Kaiser Wilhelm II. Right there you go, verse 12. One war was passed. So this is as we went through. This is describing World War One. See, one war was passed. It's passed already. And behold, there come two woes more hereafter. So the scriptures talk about three world wars taking place on the earth. And the scriptures don't explicitly go into World War II, right? But it describes it here in a verse, as Apostle Ramlab had said, you know, and this was going into World War One, as you see. Okay, so that obviously tells you what these woes are talking about. These last three woes are talking about World War One, World War Two, and World War Three. And World War Three is coming. That's why Revelation 11 and 14, it says the second woe was past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. All right, so the Second World War is gone, and the Third World War is coming. All right, this is the time we in. Behold, the third war cometh quickly. And in the midst of this war, Yahweh Shai is going to return, man. All right? It's as simple as that. So, that's more history on that. But let me see. I got some time. I guess. All right, so now we get that now. Okay? So that was World War One right there. When you know the history, you understand the mystery. Okay? Now, all right, so you know what? Yeah, I'm not gonna do the rest of that chapter right now. So I'm we're willing to try to get some more precepts and everything. All right, but that's the history on uh World War One. So Revelation chapter 9 verses 1 through 12 is describing World War One. Okay, World War Three is on its way, man. So I just wanted to go through some history on that. So hey, Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim Yahweh Shai, Bahashim Chakadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone Everywell. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect. Shalom to the elect.